The seafaring route along the eastern Adriatic coast has been one of the most important communication routes in the Mediterranean for centuries. Numerous bays and hundreds of islands and islets provided sailors with shelter from winds and storms, but also from pirates or enemy ships. Across the sea on the other side of the Adriatic, the Italian coast is not as indented and is therefore less suitable for seafaring. However, nature itself could not provide sufficient protection to ships, and the population living along the shore had to be protected from possible surprise attacks. Roman authorities had provided security for centuries, facilitating the development of fishing, shipbuilding, and maritime trade, as evidenced by the discovery of amphorae made in various parts of the Roman Empire. During the time of Emperor Justinian, from 1483 to 565, a long and difficult war was waged against the Ostrogoths, who conquered Italy and Dalmatia. After the victory of the Romans, the emperor decided to build a series of large and small fortifications along the eastern Adriatic coast. Due to their proximity to one another, they were able to communicate with signals and thereby effectively protect the residents and soldiers from sudden attacks by enemies and pirates. One of these fortifications, which could accommodate about 300 soldiers, was built above Barbat, on the hill of St. Damian, at 200 meters above sea level. Part of the fort was the Church of St. Cosma and Damian, within whose dilapidated remains a smaller chapel was built in the 14th century. It is believed that the fort was in operation for many years because it was rebuilt over time. Its remains are still visible today, but unfortunately more difficult to access due to the pines that have grown around them. During periods of low tide below St. Damjan, one can see under the sea the remains of walls, that is, sunken buildings and port infrastructure, which are evidence of the robust maritime activity of the time. In the period of late antiquity, from the 6th to the 8th centuries, the number of the island's residents living outside of the cities declined, and it would never reach the level of the Roman times until the 19th century. The way of life also changed. Because of the danger of pirate attacks, the inhabitants of Barbat and Bany rarely went to sea, and it appears that none of them owned larger ships until the 19th century. However, by the middle of the 19th century, fishing is on the rise again, and by the end of the century, tourism begins to develop, giving maritime activity new impetus. Some families adopt fishing as their business. For the Percinic, Žig, Grc, Debelic, Kurilic, and other families, this is a skill passed on from generation to generation. Traditionally, the island's shipbuilders constructed a specific type of boat propelled by oars. The vessel, called a rapska lađa, rob boat, was constructed from a hollowed-out tree trunk fitted with ribs and formwork. Records show that in 1807, when the French controlled the island, these ships sailed in a regatta celebrating Napoleon's birthday. Later, shipyards in Barbat and Banyol started to build larger ships called gaietas to suit the needs of locals. These boats were used for sailing and fishing in waters further away from the shore. Fish stocks in the sea around Rab were plentiful, and locals fished tuna, mackerel, perch, and bonito. Large schools of tuna were caught in bays such as Mag. In the 1950s, a fishing cooperative was founded in Barbat. Mirna, a canned fish factory from Rovinj, had 2 ships operating out of Barbat, Mishar and Tunolovac. This is when we begin to see the first fishermen registered in their trade. Although tuna and bonito have largely disappeared from Rab's waters due to overfishing, fishing has continued. Even today, there are several fishermen in Banyol and Barbat with more modern boats that use trawls and various other types of nets, depending on the season, fishing location, and fish species.